Good afternoon. I'm Larry Lewis with Smart Training, and I appreciate everyone who set aside some time today to attend our series on the hook, which will be taking a look over the next 3 weeks at things that affect your not only your cybersecurity with HIPAA, but your business associate agreements with vendors and how you can tighten those types of things up. We do have a September 22nd deadline date for making sure your business associate agreements are in order based on the HIPAA omnibus rule that actually went into full effect last year. There is a September 22nd date with people that set up their plans prior to January 25th of 2013 to make sure that those are in compliance with the HIPAA omnibus rule. Nothing to worry about. We'll keep you posted on that. Today, we're kicking off the series with Shawn Tuma. Shawn is a cybersecurity data breach attorney and specialist who I can't speak highly enough about. He's Dallas Magazine's 2014 Best Lawyer of the Year, or at least in that category of Best Lawyers of the Year for 2014. He's also part of the Privacy and Data Security Committee for the State Bar of Texas. Shawn is also the Information Security Committee on the American Bar Association, a member of the FBI's InfoGuard Group, and of course, International Association of Privacy Professionals. Today we're going to take a look at the practical realities of why you need a business associate agreement, and really just because you're compliant may not necessarily mean that your PHI is secure. So Shawn's going to touch on a number of things from how to protect that PHI and keep it secure to why hackers may even want that information in the first place and the dark side of compliance. Shawn, thank you for being with us today. I'm going to turn everything over to you.
Larry, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. As always, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. And today I'm privileged to have the other attendees who are participating and can hear what we have to say. And I have to say, you know, after you covered that about the business associates agreement, I may as well just sit down and turn this back over to you, because that covered a big part of what's so important about healthcare practices and what they need to do to keep themselves off the hook. And that's what I've titled my presentation today, is picking up on where you guys were with your series, is keeping your practice off the hook, because that's what we want to try to do here. And I'm going to start off by just saying data breach. If you haven't heard of that, then you're probably this fellow over here living under a rock, and you have no idea what's going on in the world around you if you've not heard the word data breach. Data breach has become one of the most talked about issues in the news, in the business community, in the data security community, and certainly in the healthcare area, because it is one of the biggest risks that all of those that people in general, the business community, and healthcare providers face. That's the risk of data breach. Now, we've all seen the news. We've heard of the Neiman Marcuses, the Dairy Queens, the Home Depots, all of these different companies that have been breached. And there's a reason for that. The reason is data. Everyone wants data. It's the currency of the 21st century. That's why you have Google and Facebook that put so much information that'll give you these applications, that'll give you these services for free or for 99 cents. And all they ask for in exchange is one little thing, your data, because they want to take your data and use it to make a whole lot more money off of it. Data is very valuable. Last year, in Verizon's 2014 data breach investigations report, they showed there are 9 patterns from the last 10 years of breaches that show up time and time again. These are typically tailored to the business breaches, to where we're breaching for all information, not one particular category of information, but they are applicable to healthcare providers because, as we're going to talk about in a few minutes, healthcare providers' data is as valuable or more valuable than all of the other companies and businesses' data that's out there. And if you look at these statistics, 35% of these breaches come from web application attacks, 22% cyber espionage. Now that's more in the high-tech business industry. Point-of-sale intrusions, that's what we've seen with like the Michaels, the Neiman Marcus, and there's one other company that I bet everyone's thinking about right now, and they're saying, aha, I know who he's talking about. I haven't forgotten about them. I'm going to get to that one in a little bit. I want to talk about, but I'm going to lead you up to that point, though, before we talk about the big one that everyone knows about, because I bet there's something about them that you didn't realize. So anyway, card skimmers, a lot of times that's seeking credit card data. Insider misuse. That's something that in the business world, in the overall data breach world, we're seeing about 8% of all activities, breach activities are a result of insider misuse. But when we're talking about healthcare breaches and reportable breaches, the number goes way, way up. And it's not all misuse with a nefarious intent of people committing theft or things of that nature. A lot of times it's simple negligence, people making mistakes. And that's where we see a lot of the healthcare breaches come from. Crimeware, miscellaneous errors, those are really not that applicable as often to the healthcare arena. But down at the bottom you see less than 1%. This is in the business world in general. Physical theft and loss. This actually is a huge percentage when we're talking about the healthcare providers. So physical theft and loss is something that doesn't get a lot of attention when we're looking at breach plans in the general business world. But when we're talking about the healthcare arena, which the providers such as the attendees today, this is something that a lot of attention needs to be focused on. So the question is, for people to want all this data, what do they want it for? How do they make money from it? The way they do this is something called the Darknet. You have two different kinds of breaches, generally speaking. You have those where people are going after some specific identifiable data that they know the entity has, and they're trying to take just that. Okay, the more targeted breaches. And then you have the general gathering of data where they don't care what kind of data it is. They're just gathering any data they can find. Now the second category, this general data gathering process, they use what's called the Darknet. And that's basically the black market of the internet. That's where you can find things for sale ranging from human beings, and yes, you really can, to military-grade weapons, fake IDs, illegal drugs, prostitution, gambling, and you've got it, stolen data. And the way they do this is they use something called the Tor network, which allows for concealed identity of the people who are entering into these transactions, and they can use anonymous transfers of money to purchase what they're trying to get. And the way the bad guys do it is they then take your stolen data that they have gathered through all of these illegal activities, and they put it into bulk packages and sell it without even having any idea what's in there. It doesn't matter because they're selling bulk data, somehow like with a bank, how banks will take packaged bad debt that they no longer feel they can collect, and they'll just put X number of loans or debts into a package and sell it as a bulk, and the purchaser has no idea what they're really getting, whether they're collectible or not, but they buy it for pennies on the dollar to go take a chance. That's how data works when we're talking about these bulk sales, and that's why everyone's data is valuable to these kind of criminals, because it doesn't matter what it is. Now, when we're talking about specific types of data, the targeting of certain kinds of data, that's where they get to a higher value. That's where they're trying to get specific kinds of data through a targeted attack because they can make more money off of it. For example, Social Security numbers, 25 cents to $3 each. credit card numbers, when all they can get is the credit card number itself, not all of the verification data. Those go anywhere from $2 to $9 a piece. Identities, $5 to $10. Now, a credit card with full data is worth a lot more than just a credit card number. So I'm going to tell you that one in a minute. But the real question is how much is an electronic healthcare record worth? Because that's what really matters to you folks who are listening in today. So let's start with this. A stolen credit card. This was on CNN within the last couple of weeks, and they did some good research to verify it. It's worth $102.60 on average for a stolen credit card if you can get all of the authentication data with it. That's big money to people who use a credit card skimmer and are able to attack that credit card skimmer and obtain those codes while the transaction's in process, such as how we saw with the Michaels, with the Home Depot breach now, with the Neiman Marcus breach. And so then that leads us to the next one. Before I tell you how much it's worth, let me just tell you this. We've talked about the big businesses that have been breached, but what about the healthcare entities? In April of 2012, hackers in Eastern Europe attacked the Utah Department of Health. Purposeful hack, purposefully went after them because they wanted their PHI. They stole 780,000 PH records from the Medicaid and Children's Health Insurance Plan. So obviously there's some value there, right? December 2013, Vermont Health Connect. That was attacked by Romanian hackers. They were attacking it for the PHI. And fortunately, it was only test data that was in there because they didn't realize it was being worked on at the time. But they had attacked it and penetrated it over 15 different times before they were caught. May 2014, not too long ago, the Minnesota Department of Public Health and Human Services was attacked by Eastern European hackers. They hit this site 17,000 times in an hour to the server until the server gave way and they were able to breach the server. This is an unbelievable attack on a facility, and it tells you there has to be a lot of value there for them to want to put the kind of effort into it that they need to do a DDoS type attack like this. And they were able to get 1.3 million individuals' PHI records from this. And so obviously there's a lot of value there. April and June of 2014 of this year, Chinese hackers hit the community health systems out of, I believe it's Tennessee, and obtained 4.5 million patients' PHI records in this. And they haven't gone through the fines yet, but you can bet they're going to get hit pretty hard. So what's my point? My point is your practice's data is valuable too, not only from the business side, not only from the credit card transactions, which are valuable, or the ability for them to try to get into your bank accounts, or just your data on your system in general, but the PHI has a lot of value. So are you ready for this? Here's the going rate for electronic healthcare records. The rate is, conservative estimates say that any electronic health record can be up to, can start off at $50, and depending on the quality and who it is, they can go up to $1,000 each for each record. So when you put that into comparison with some of those other things like just the credit card number, you see why as a healthcare provider you really, really have something valuable within your custody, and you have the duty of taking care of it. So why? Well, the first, I'm going to show you a couple of articles here where have been in recent news. One, March of this year, where they're talking about healthcare information breaches on the rise. This is from All Clear ID, one of the absolute best organizations out there on gathering this kind of information. Then at the RSA panel, which is the annual gathering of cybersecurity type people interested in this kind of issue, it's the preeminent gathering or conference on that. They had a panel that were talking about the increase in thieves stealing medical data. This was a year ago, but the statistics have shown that it's only increased within the last year. So what are the reasons why this PHI is so valuable, these healthcare records? Because they have a shelf life much longer than that of a credit card. You don't cancel healthcare records, okay? You can't just call and cancel it and get a new healthcare record. So it's not as easy to stop a fraudulent use of them. But what this also means is it means a thief can steal the record, can keep the information for themselves, and then can resell it and resell it and resell it to others. And those thieves can resell them to others. So they're able to take something, steal it, use it themselves, and then resell it and make a profit on both sides. It's a great business model if you're a thief. That's a problem for healthcare providers. One of the things they do with this is they sell it. They sell them to providers that, let's say, they're not the most ethical people in the world, and they're trying to find a way to scale their business without doing more work. So what do? They buy these records, and they do fraudulent billing with them to bill for services that were never performed on patients they've never had. And it's also a scheme for money laundering. A lot of these crime organizations that are engaged in the data theft, they will then have fronts with these healthcare providers so that they can use them to launder their money and to make money off of the data. It's a way to monetize the data that they've stolen. So that's one reason. Another is people will use the fraudulent healthcare or the healthcare records that have been stolen to obtain fraudulently to get free healthcare that they're not really entitled to. They use it to obtain prescription drugs, and then they take the drugs that they obtain and they go and they sell the drugs for whatever you can sell, you know, narcotics for on the black market, and that's all a way of monetizing this stolen data. And children's records are considered to be the most valuable because there's no credit reporting. They don't monitor their the uses of their information as much. They don't have a bank account to tie a lot of this to, and usually they don't have identity theft monitoring, so they can continue doing this for years and years and years. So the point of all this is you have something really valuable in your possession, and it's more valuable than the data that a lot of normal non-healthcare provider businesses have. And if we've learned one thing about the cyber criminals, is that they are very smart. They are in this to do one thing, and that's make money. And when they're in this to make money and they can find a more profitable target to go after, they're going to. And that's why we have seen a rise in the number of healthcare records and PHI attacks over the last year and the last couple of years. So why am I telling you all this? Because I know what you're sitting there thinking. It's the same thing when I talk to lawyers about this issue, and trust me, I do talk to lawyers about this issue, about the data that we have and how we protect it. And I know the response. The response is, yeah, but not me. Nobody really cares about my little old practice. It's not that important. They're not, you know, there's a million other people out there that they're going to get. They're not going to get me. Plus, you know, I have good antivirus. I have a firewall. We have a good staff, IT staff. Or we've outsourced it to some people who tell us they're really good at this. So they've told us we don't have anything to worry about. We don't have the money to waste time and effort focusing on stuff that doesn't matter. We need to focus on caring for our patients or our clients in the lawyer's case. I've heard all this time and time again, but the truth is we're all vulnerable. We're all in the crosshairs. And you didn't really think I forgot about this one, did you? When I was talking about the potential targets, because this is something I hear now. You know, Target last Black Friday really changed the paradigm here. It really brought home to a lot of people that data breach is a real issue and something that really needs to be considered. But not enough, because what we always hear, what people always say is, Shawn, I get it. I know companies are under attack, but I'm not Target. I'm not someone with that kind of revenue or data, or my company, my business, my practice. We don't do that. We're not at that level. Why should we spend the time and the resources to pay attention to this stuff? I hear it over and over again. And then I asked them, I said, have you ever heard of a little company called Fazio Mechanical Services? And 99 times out of 100, they haven't. Now, if I were speaking to all of you in person right now, I would say, let me see a show of hands. And I'm raising my hand in my office over here. And the people outside my door probably think I look like an idiot. But that's okay. You get the point. Raise your hand if you've heard of Fazio Mechanical Services. Are you raising your hand right now, wherever you're watching this? Okay. Fazio Mechanical Services is the company responsible for the Target breach. Okay? Fazio Mechanical Services, to put this in healthcare providers' terms, is the business associate, the downstream business associate that is responsible for the Target breach. You know how? Raise your hand. Okay, I'm going to tell you. Because Fazio Mechanical was the HVAC vendor that provided air conditioning and refrigeration services to some of the Target stores. And the way Target worked is Target had a vendor portal set up that allowed their vendors to submit electronic automated invoicing into the system. And when the hackers wanted to get Target, we believe, we don't know for sure if they did this intentionally or if it was just dumb luck that allowed them to do it. But what happened is they sent spear phishing emails to Fazio Mechanical Services employees. In a spear phishing email, you know, you've all seen them, you all get them. It's the one, click here to see whatever, okay? Don't click, because what happened is they clicked. Somebody in Fazio clicked. That then deposited malware on their system that gave the bad guys an intrusion point into Fazio Mechanical. They then went through Fazio Mechanical's network with what's called a sniffer program, and it sniffed around, like picture a bloodhound dog sniffing around, you know, ears flopping around and all that, and sniffing around for a clue. Well, what this was is it's sniffing around for login credentials, usernames, passwords to other sites. They found Fazio's login into the Target system, used that as an entry point to get into Target's system. That's how they first penetrated Target's networks to then deposit the malware and set up this elaborate scheme that they needed to do. Fazio is the business associate of Target. Now, the fact that Fazio is still in business, and last I checked a few weeks ago they are, is but for the grace of God and the grace of Target, because otherwise they probably wouldn't even be here anymore. But the point of this is cybersecurity impacts all of us, because we may not be a target, as in the big target company, but we may be a target to get to a target, if that makes sense. We may be someone that the bad guys want to attack, not just to get our information, but maybe to find an access point into other companies, other providers that we do business with. You know, you just never know what's going to cause them to come hacking and attacking your system. But what it comes down to is it's not a matter of if, it's a question of when. When will your practice be attacked? And the odds are pretty good it already has been, even if you do not know it at this time. The fourth annual benchmark study on patient privacy and data security came out back in March of this year. It's done by Poneman Institute, the preeminent researcher in this area. They found that 90% of healthcare providers, healthcare organizations, suffered at least one data breach during the past 2 years. 90%. Okay, you want to run those odds? Those are tough. Okay, here's the survey. You can access this online if you want to read more about it. But what they found is they found that employee negligence is a major risk, and it's being fueled by this what's called the bring your own device movement. That's where instead of the company providing all of our equipment and our devices to use, we bring our own laptops, we bring our own telephones, you know, and in a healthcare provider's practice, you have to be really careful about this, because the way this works most of the time is when you access the employer's databases to view information, it's depositing that information on the device itself. And so then you have not only an issue about your practice's hardware, you have an issue about the hardware and the fact that PHI could be deposited and left on the devices of anyone in your organization who have used their own personal devices to access your database of information. So it's very important to think about that. Small practices are a major target. Since 2009, the Office of Civil Rights have received more than 81,000 reports of breaches of PHI that affect fewer than 500 patients. And we can tie that to a small practice, because generally patient information is kept in a, you know, if they're going to get one patient, they're going to get all the information when they breach and they hack in. And what we, you know, see is when it's less than 500 patients, that's usually indicative of a smaller practice. So we have breaches in smaller practices. They're not always a result of an outside hacker, but a lot of times they're a result of negligence by the employees and the way that they treat and handle the PHI and the devices containing the PHI, as Sean, we're going to see for a minute. Yes.
Sean, before you move on, that whole BYOD situation is quite a concern, and I think you can tie that back to the Tor networks you were talking about earlier. And it just makes it so complicated from a policy standpoint of trying to keep track of tablets and what employees and subcontractors are using. But to bring it home, a Tor network is something that people use every day. We've all seen those movies. Your buddy sends you a link and it says, hey, take a look at the bootleg video of the latest Denzel Washington movie. Oh, great, I don't have to pay $20 to go see that. You click on the Tor network, watch the movie. The hacker then has access to everything that is on that device. And unless things are encrypted properly, they then get access to the patient data that may be on that tablet or device. So, you know, that linking that back to the reality of how these devices are actually used in the real world creates a little consternation on how offices need to set up policies and procedures to protect against that. And I'm sure the Apple Pay is going to add to everyone's headaches here in the not too distant future. But I did want to just mention that before you moved on.
Well, Larry, that's a great point, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because BYOD is a problem that all organizations are struggling with right now, and for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. And we're going to talk about encryption here in a minute, but you know, the only real solution I've found, and I'll share this with you privately because I don't want to use this as a marketing thing for a company that I work with closely, but there is a company that's developed a process where when people use mobile devices, their employees use mobile devices, the data never gets onto their device at all. It's always residing on the host employer's database. It just gives them an ability to view it back on the company website or company database servers. And you and I can talk more about that, and then you can decide how you want to handle if you want to make that recommendation. But that's the only solution I've been able to come to on that. But you're right when you say encryption. Encryption really is what it's going to all come back to, and you mentioned that at just the right time, because now we're going to talk about the consequences of a data breach. One, obviously the compromise and loss of the data, the loss of productivity, the burden and the expense of people within your office having to respond, make the reportings to the Office of Civil Rights, whether you hire an attorney to do it or you have a chief privacy officer who does it, or however you handle that. That's an administrative burden and an expense. The loss of trust by your patients, by the people you work with, bad publicity. These days, there are websites all over the place where they do one thing. They go out and they scavenger around for every data breach they can find, no matter how small, and they put it on a website because that's what they like to do. So thinking that it won't get out, that's not going to happen anymore. It's become too much of a business for too many people in the data breach industry, so there's publicity around all breaches. The credit monitoring and remediation that you sometimes have to do in order to have a proper breach response, depending on what was compromised. Claims and lawsuits. People are filing lawsuits all the time against entities, including health care providers, that breach their information. They're not always successful. In fact, they're not usually successful. But people can sue you anytime for any reason. That doesn't mean the claim's valid, and you still have to go through the process of defending against it. And guess what? That's not cheap. It's not easy. It takes a lot of your time, stress that it places on you, your family, your practice. And then, of course, y'all all know there's the fines and penalties from the government and the agencies, and then the increased scrutiny of your data security practices that almost always come with a resolution from the Department of Health and Human Services. That's who you're really going to have to deal with more than anything else, is when you have a breach, a compromise of PHI information in your practice, you're going to have to answer to the Department of Health and Human Services. And I know, I've heard it. People tell me, oh, well, it's something small, I'm just not going to report it. That is foolish, because it will get out, it will get back to them, and when it gets back to them, you know, as they say, the cover-up is always worse than the crime, and you better remember that on this. The cover-up is always worse than the crime, because when they find that you knew of a breach and you didn't report it, they're going to come down on you a lot harder than they would have otherwise. So you've got to just stand up and be upright about it and fess up. So let's talk about a couple of settlements that involved PHI from a small practice, or not a small practice, a small healthcare provider, provider, you know what I mean, company in the healthcare industry. This is what I get for writing too small on the slides, right? I know that rule, but I wanted to put all this information here for you. That way, if you wanted to ask Larry later on, you wanted to say, hey, can we get a copy of this presentation, you now have a good reason to. So you've got all this in here to read. I'm not going to read it all to you. The gist of this was an unencrypted laptop was stolen. It contained PHI of 441 patients. All right, now just stop for a moment. And each one of you, wherever you are, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and think for just a second. Do you have a laptop or a tablet or a phone or a thumb drive or a desktop computer that could easily be picked up and stolen, that has PHI of 441 or more patients residing on it right now? Don't answer. Just think about it. Okay. Next question. Is it encrypted? Because if it's not encrypted, this could be you. The OCR issued a fine of $50,000 for this, and they also require other corrective measures, such as this company must promptly investigate any information where there's a suspicion that someone failed to comply with their privacy and security policies. The reason that they were hit like this is because in the investigation, it basically came out that they did not do a thorough risk assessment or risk analysis once the breach was discovered, to go through and see if the data subjects, the people whose PHI was taken, if it posed any risk to them or not. They didn't go through the process, these 3 steps here, of evaluating the impact and the probability of what this risk was going to impose to these people. They didn't immediately or quickly implement appropriate security measures to address potential risks. Why? They couldn't, because they didn't even evaluate the risks. Okay? So that's what the OCR is looking at here. They're saying you didn't even act like you cared. You didn't even take a step to show that this meant anything, to you. So what do you think they're going to do if you don't report it at all? They're really going to come down on you. But then they say they didn't document the security measures and the rationale for what measures they adopted or did not adopt. These are 3 things that you need to remember in the event you have a breach of PHI. Obviously, they're important to the OCR, or they would not have gone to the process of giving this reasoning. Then this is really good. They said they did not reasonably implement security measures sufficient to ensure the confidentiality of the PHI using portable devices. And what it really meant is they did not use encryption on the devices, because we all know how easy it is to lose portable devices. We've all had it happen to us. And because we know that, we therefore need to assume that's going to happen again. And if it does happen, when it does happen, how do we make sure we've protected that data? The way we do it, the only real safe harbor you have is you have to have it encrypted. Okay. The OCR director, Leon Rodriguez, gave a quote about this. He said, "This action sends a strong message to the healthcare industry that, regardless of size, covered entities must take action and will be held accountable for safeguarding their patients' health information." And then he goes on to say, "Encryption is an easy method for making lost information unusable, unreadable, and undecipherable." Okay, do you think this guy's telling you should encrypt your devices? I think so. He's making it pretty clear. A settlement last year, the day after Christmas, last Christmas, the OCR settled a case with a Massachusetts physician. He had a dermatology practice. And what got him into hot water was he had a thumb drive with 2,200 patients' PHI records on it that one of the employees had with them in their car, and it was stolen out of the car. Nobody knows what happened to it from that point forward. We don't know if they stole the car and this was just a byproduct. We don't know if they went and wiped the thumb drive because they needed a $9 thumb drive for class or something like that. We have no idea. But what we do know is that it was unencrypted. And because it was unencrypted, it was a breach. Had it been encrypted, it would not have been a breach. Remember that point, okay? The physician self-reported, the OCR investigated. They imposed a $150,000 fine on his practice for one thumb drive with 2,200 patient records. Okay, is that hitting home with anybody? 2,200 patient records. I know that's a lot for a smaller practice, But a $150,000 fine is also a lot for a smaller practice. So, you know, cut the two numbers in half and you're still, you know, not where you want to be. They imposed, in addition to the fine, a corrective action plan, which they always do, which basically means they're going to come in and start snooping around in your practice now because you've given them a reason to question your data security practices. That's really what all this means. You can read through the details later on if you'd like. But what it means is the OCR now has you on their radar, and they are going to be coming and checking and following up on you. So have you noticed anything in common with these two? The statistics show, and remember at the very beginning I said theft or loss of portable devices really sticks out in the healthcare arena. The reason why is the two latest reports show 54.1% of reported breaches are a theft or loss of a portable device. Okay? That's one thing in common. The other is none were encrypted. Now, raise your hand if you know why. No encrypted ones were included in this. Anybody know the answer? Okay. The answer is because if it's encrypted, it is not a breach. If you're encrypted, it's not a breach because that data is unusable. So here's a tip to remember. Being compliant does not mean that your data is secure. Compliance and security are two different standards, and compliance is the lesser of the two. Compliance does not require encryption, but security requires encryption. Now, if you go back to what the director Rodriguez says, I think that's as close as you can get to saying encryption is required as well. So the lesson here is you really need to encrypt. One more I want to talk about here that's really interesting. This involved a photocopier that had been used to copy PHI, and when the company or when the health plan retired the photocopier, no one thought about it. That this was back in 2010 when they retired it out of service. They had leased it. No one thought about the fact that the hard drive was retaining images of everything that had been copied. So a news station got a hold of the hard drive. They were doing a story on this and found that this health plan had returned this leased copier with 34,579 PHI records of individuals on its hard drive. And what happened is, what do you expect? The OCR hit them for $1.2 million in fines over this. Okay, think about your computers, your systems, your IT components, devices that you've used in your practice, but then you retire, like maybe a mobile phone that you've given to your youngest child because you don't want to buy them one. So you give them your old outdated one without having a secure wiping of that phone. And information is still residing on that phone. I've seen people do this. Think about old copy machines. Think about your old computers, your old notebook computers. If they were used to access PHI, it's quite possible that information is still on the hard drive. In data security, we know you never actually delete anything. You just make it more difficult to find. Think about vendors where you are outsourcing your IT work to vendors, okay? And now they have, in many cases, your data, if they're backing it up and saving it for you, which is an important security function. Now they have access to this data. What are they doing with their equipment when they're retiring it out of service? See, you're still responsible for all, if it's your data, okay, if you take it and you collect it, you are now responsible for it through its life cycle until it goes away, unless you have your BAA with these people, because that's what allocates the responsibilities, and it is also what preserves, theoretically, the confidentiality of it, because under the BAA, everybody has an obligation of confidentiality and to protect this PHI. And the theory is, if you have a contractual agreement with someone else where they are contractually obligated to protect this information, then your giving it to them in their possession is not a breach of security, because they are now bound to uphold the same obligations as you. That's the big overriding purpose of BAAs, because they preserve the confidentiality and they allocate responsibility. And Larry, is that you?
Well, yeah, that's me. One of the other things to throw in there, especially on IT vendors, is that smaller IT vendors, if you're working with them, a lot of smaller IT vendors don't even know that they are obligated to follow the HIPAA guidelines. They are under the same obligation as a covered entity is. So therefore, if their employees, excuse me, if their employees who have access to that PHI for one reason or another aren't trained sufficiently in the same fashion that you train your employees on the HIPAA standards as a CE, and they lose that data, you, again, are responsible for that. And if you don't have a BAA, I have talked to OCI investigators and enforcement folks that will not look too kindly on that situation if it occurs. Just FYI.
No, that's right. And what's the next question that comes up from that is, what do you do if your vendor says, no, I'm not going to sign that? No, I'm not going to agree to that. What do you then do? I'll tell you what you do. You run the other way. Because you, number one, you cannot afford to do business with someone who's not going to respect the law. This is the law. If they're not going to respect these rules and these requirements, that should first tell you something about how they handle their job and their level of professionalism. But two, it's imposing a tremendous liability on you because you know of the obligation, you know what you're supposed to do, you know you're supposed to have that BAA, and you made a decision to go forward without it. And when that comes out to an OCR investigator, that they're trying to do right in a strange sort of way, and they're trying to look at the intentions and what people knew or didn't know going into these situations. And when they find out you knew the risk, you knew the rule, and you consciously made a decision not to follow it, you're not their friend at that point. So that leads me to my last circle here that we're trying to keep off of the hook, and that's, what are my recommendations? I could sit here and talk all day about in-depth recommendations, but let's just cover the important ones. Implement and train your staff on the policies and procedures for dealing with the risks of breach of PHI in general and the risks of breach of PHI from mobile devices. And that necessarily requires that you have prepared such policies and procedures. So that's a given. You've got to have that. Then you document your decisions for what you did and why you did it. It's very important in the event you have a later investigation and you're asked why you did something or why you didn't. If you have a reason for it and you've documented it, they at least see you've tried. You worked through this, and you made a good faith error, or you may not have, but a good faith error that's documented is a lot better than not having it documented, because then they're going to assume you probably just didn't care. Encrypt all data. Okay, I know that's easier said than done. I know. Encrypt as much as possible. You want to shoot for all data, but at least encrypt as much as you possibly can in the real world. Encryption is your safe harbor. It's your lifeline here. Have a current business associates agreement for everyone who could have access to your PHI. I don't care who they are. If they could have access to it, you must have a BAA. And as Larry mentioned earlier, there's a deadline, I believe it was September 22nd or something like that, that you need to pay attention to. So stay tuned for more information on that. Have a breach response plan ready to execute in the event you have a breach of PHI. Okay, it does not need to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be 20 pages of in-depth information, and I've seen them and I've written them, some like that for some organizations. But it can be very simple. But the goal here is You want to know what to do to execute as soon as it happens so you can take action and not be sitting around thinking, twiddling your thumbs, saying, oh man, what do I need to do now? Not sure. Let me do some Google research and try to figure it out. No, you want to have a plan ready to go. Who do you call? What are you looking for? You know, who do you notify? How soon must you notify? Those are the kind of things you want to have ready to go. Who on your team needs to be involved in the response? Those are just a couple of points to think about. Never, ever, ever, ever fail to report a breach. Ever. It will be catastrophic. And my last point, tune in next week for Jim Moore and then Jim Stafford the following week. And with that, that's all I've got. I'm done.
Shawn, thank you very much. I just want to go back to the last point you made about never ever failing to report a breach. And for two reasons. One, obviously, is the law, but if you're the privacy officer of a small CE and you are responsible for implementing these policies and procedures and you don't report that, courts have found that the privacy officer is personally liable for not reporting that, and you could be held personally responsible for that data breach loss just by the sheer fact of you didn't report that. So if somebody on staff tells you it wasn't that big of a deal and don't worry about it, I would think about that twice before not reporting something.
Absolutely, Larry. One of the most important things to realize in the reporting process is whether you're in the civil realm of courts, judges, juries, lawsuits, or you're in the administrative realm of reporting to attorneys generals of the various states, the FTC, or the OCR, which is obviously the primary focus here today. Everyone understands that this is not a question of if there will be a breach. It's a question of when. So the huge slap is no longer coming from the fact that you were breached. Okay, it's accepted that everybody's more than likely going to get breached. The big question is, what can you show you did before the breach to try to prepare for it, to take this seriously and to try to do right? It's the do right rule is what this is. What did you do before the breach to try to prepare and do right? And then what did you do after the breach to try to mitigate the problem, find out what happened, and do right? It's the do right rule. And when they feel like you've done right and you just didn't quite get there, then they're not going to hit you as hard as when they see that it was willful neglect. And that's when it's, going to be catastrophic for everybody involved.
Shawn, one more quick question. We got about 5 minutes, and maybe you can spend about 90 seconds on this. Let's say someone did have what might be considered a breach or lost or exposed PHI months ago or something like that, and it was not reported. What can they do about that if they have any concerns at this point, or is there anything that can be done about it?
Well, you want to do the best you can as soon as you can. So the goal is to assess what happened, assess how that information may have been used, what the potential risks and the harm that may come from that are, and do it very quickly. And then you're going to have to report that. And when you report it, you're going to need to have a pretty good reason for why it was not reported earlier. And if you're dealing with months, then it's not necessarily going to be a really bad thing. If you're dealing with years, then you do the best you can as soon as you can is really what it comes down to. But you can't just ignore it, because it will get back somehow.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all this with us today, Shawn, and I can't thank you enough for going into details about about the data breach and encryption responsibility that everyone has. Hopefully there's quite a few takeaways from what Shawn spoke about today. If you do want to get a replay or access to the replay, just send us an email. Everybody that attended today will have access. If there are others that you know, especially if there are others who attended through the TDA, Texas Dental Association, or Oklahoma Dental Association, two of our clients, please just contact me at the office. I'll get you access to this. Jim Moore will be up next week. Jim Moore, National HIPAA Specialist, and on the staff here at Smart Training, will be talking about updating your business associate agreements, training standards, toward the 2014 and headed into 2015 that you need to take a look at. And then we'll be wrapping up the series with Jim Sanford. Jim is the Vice President over at Coalfire Technologies. Coalfire is one of the largest third-party assessors for risk assessments with the government, as well as PCI and financial institutions, healthcare institutions. Smart Training has created an opportunity and a partnership with Coalfire to give you the opportunity to access doing these risk assessments online, and Jim will be talking about that and how it works. So once again, I want to thank everybody for their time and attending today. Shawn, thank you once again, and hopefully everyone has a blessed day. Bye-bye.